This is Giovanni Roverso in Bellingham, Washington. You're watching Live Music Fights for Survival, Part 4. On May 20th, I interviewed Hollie Huthman, owner of the Shakedown and the racket beside it, makeshift board member, and recently, city council member.
So I'm Hollie Huthman. I've been a musician since I was a kid. I graduated from college in 1999 from Western, and around that time I also found the Bellingham music scene and started going to shows. I was in bands off and on. After about a decade of having a desk job, I decided that I wanted to do something else, and I've co-owned the Shakedown for 9 years. There's a live music venue in town called the Nightlight, and it had kind of closed and reopened a few times, and at some point somebody got the idea in my head that I would be really good at running a venue. That kind of started the spark, and the Nightlight eventually did close down for good, and it was in the space that the underground is in. So I started kind of looking into what it would take to run a business and start a business, and which turns out to be like going to graduate school. It's really intense and there's a lot to learn, and that idea didn't really work out. It turns out that's the one thing, that spot's just really big, and in order to run a venue in that spot, you have to cover a lot of overhead. And I had nowhere near enough money to actually take it over. I kind of sat on the idea for a while, and I started talking to somebody who's becoming my friend, who is a live music photographer like me, Marty Watson, and he had moved into town from San Diego. I was thinking about opening a music venue at some point, and he said, well, I'd love to look at your business plan. And then he liked it so much, he decided to ask me if I wanted a business partner. Marty and I put together our savings accounts and opened up the Shakedown on a shoestring budget. There's speakers, there's big subs and some mains that are still upstairs at the Shakedown in the balcony. Those were the original ones that we opened up with, and they had been in the 3D. We definitely wouldn't have been successful if it wasn't for lots of other people. A well-known band that's come through that was really important to me was High on Fire, a metal band. It's one of those bands we probably never should have been able to get at a space our size, and so it's kind of amazing that we got them. I think another really fun high-profile name was Dick Dale, the legendary surf guitar godfather, really, of surf music. He was at that time already a very old man, but still shredded. He passed away, I think, a year ago, so it was really cool to have him there. So I had been following Chelsea Wolfe for years before she was popular, and I think 3 or 4 times I wrote to Chelsea Wolfe's manager, and I remember at some point I was like, oh, she's getting too popular, we're not going to be able to get her, and we ended up with a hold. Yeah, we kind of have a booking team. That's a tough part of this shutdown. So you need at least 4 months to start filling up your calendar if you have touring bands. All of those touring bands also need all of the other venues to open, and they need months and months of preparation to set up their tours. So the opening of venues is extra tough, and it's all across the country. We all rely on each other. That network of venues relies on each other because bands tour. It's also extra tough because nobody knows when we're going to be able to have bands again. There are a lot of guesses. Quite a few times we put an act on the calendar, and then a month later we have to reschedule for another 3 months down the road. So a lot of bands now are just scheduling for 2021. They're just like, forget about it. We're gonna really steer clear of any potential problems. A venue the size of the Shakedown, one of our advantages is that if we have between 30 and 80 people come to a show, it's okay. Our average show, if you take all of them, our average show size is probably 70 people, and we can survive off of that. barely survive off of that. And so until those touring bands really start ramping up, we can have local shows and they'll probably do wonderfully for us. A place like the Wild Buffalo, the size of the Wild Buffalo, which is twice as big as us, they completely depend on touring bands because those touring bands are going to get at least 200 people in there consistently. They need that in order to survive at all. A bit more tough for places the size of the Wild Buffalo. So it's really important. The collective of live music venues gets help from the federal government. Ultimately, the National Independent Venue Association, there's a lobbyist that is speaking to our interests at a federal level, and so we're optimistic about that, about getting something to keep all of these venues alive. SaveOurStages.com gives people a general idea of what they can do to help. Writing to elected officials is a big part of that. And I think that it's something like over 300,000 emails have gone to elected officials across the country, which is astounding. It's pretty awesome. And there's also a petition that can be signed. We're getting a lot of press. There's a lot of hope, I think, to make sure that venues can survive through this, can reopen when we're able to and it's safe to. Most importantly, when it's safe to, and people are ready for it. It's a big thing too. So even when the government says we can open, that doesn't mean that people are going to feel okay being in that space. I think a lot of what I have learned over the last 6 months is that sometimes the most important things is just that I have a voice that I can use. Things tend to be much more complicated than meets the eye. Nothing is black and white, particularly when you have so many interests and so much bureaucracy and laws. And when it comes to something that Seattle or San Francisco does, they have a lot more resources, both people resources and financial resources. We can't act quite as quickly or with as much force as a bigger city can. But sometimes it's nice because Seattle does something and then we can just copy it. That's always great. That's what we did with this resolution that I worked on. Is Seattle did it first. We took it and we improved on it a little bit and we passed it. And then other cities in Washington took what we did and improved on that and passed it. And so we can kind of be a part of a collective piggybacking on the places that have more resources. So I think that we have done well as a city in response to COVID. We have amazing city staff who's really doing the majority of the work on things, creating ideas and thinking about solutions and problem solving and collecting data and things like that, figuring out what we can do, finding resources, finding money, all of that. That's all city staff. And they're all working really hard, lots of overtime to try to come up with solutions. And, within the ability of what we can accomplish, I think we're doing pretty good. We applied for and were approved for the PPP. The whole process has been really frustrating. And we're not unique in that at all. Paycheck Protection Program, applying for it was frustrating. Figuring out how to use it has been incredibly frustrating. It's really complicated. You kind of have to tie yourselves in knots to figure out like how to use it in a way that helps you as a business the most. And it's also been frustrating seeing inequality in that too, where it's like, the people who need it the most aren't the people who benefit the most from it. And there will be people left out that definitely shouldn't have been left out. We will make it work. I hope that things improve with the forgiveness portion, the requirements for forgiveness, because it's, for places that are completely shut, like it doesn't make a lot of sense to put people back on a payroll, particularly venues. What we really need our rent paid and our insurance paid, because those are two huge expenses for venues. Venues out there that, in the country that probably pay $30,000 to $50,000 a month in rent. There are places out there like that, much bigger than us, of course. If you have no way to pay that rent and that rent just keeps accruing month to month to month, that means the place isn't going to open. We did apply for a couple other grants and didn't get approved for those, but those were like the Washington State grant, where I think they were giving like $10,000. I think 700 businesses in Whatcom County applied, and it was just a tiny percentage of those 700 that were approved for that. So I think it might have been like 20 out of the 700 or something. I don't know the exact numbers, but those grants they go so quickly. The idea of some is that one thing that can be applied pretty fairly is rent forgiveness. It would be fair to distribute funds equitably in that way, where you don't have to pay rent, and it's the same amount, it's the same proportion of help for each different business. I think it wouldn't surprise me if it took 2 years to financially be back where we were before. There's so much about running a venue that is the momentum and the consistency that has come before. So it'll take a long time to get back there. Yeah. As long as we survive, as long as we can open, we'll make it work. We've been through hard stuff before, so we're seasoned, but just being able to open it all is kind of the biggest challenge. Being able to open without like an enormous amount of debt that we could never get out from under again. So the bummer about the 50-person cap is that you not only are you counting audience members, but you're counting staff, you're counting band members. So that starts to cut into the 50 really fast. So like if you have 3 bands, you have 5 band members each, that cuts out 15. You probably have 5 staff members. So there's another 5. So now you've got 30 people that can come to your show. Like with the Shakedown, 30 people is essentially our break even. So if less than 30 people come to a show, that generally means we would have done better closed financially than open. You can't exist off that, as at least a venue our size. Smaller venues could. The jobs that venues create and the tax revenue that venues produce, and the fact that when somebody goes out to see a live show, they also go out to have dinner and drinks before, maybe they stay at a hotel, and they create a more vibrant city overall economically. That's very important. But also, I think unless you are regularly a part of live shows, it's not as obvious the community that builds, the positivity and the connection that you feel with everybody around you when you're at a show. You can't put any kind of monetary figure on that sort of a thing.